Before we introduce the speaker who's already standing up, ready to go, if you look at the front of your booklets, you'll see a picture that looks like this. And this is the unveiling of Oscar Buddy Marion by Karen McNutt this year. So, Karen, stand up and take a bow. And believe it or not, 2 weeks ago she had a hip surgery, intensive fitness training, and she drove her truck down here this week. How's that for a story? Doug, you ready?
Yes, sir. Good evening. My right knee and I are going to do this, as John would say, in situ, I guess. There are a couple of things that really bother me about being here that you ought to know. Number one, I'm listed as the dinner theater. Did you notice that? So if y'all expect a hip-hop number, that's not happening. And you'll be grateful for that. No singing and dancing. Well, I don't know, I might break into song somewhere along the line. You don't know. I'm Doug Bostick. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the South Carolina Battleground Trust. We're a land trust that preserves military historic sites in South Carolina. And we do sites from any war. Revolutionary War, the late unpleasantness, and I'm not talking about Hurricane Florence, earlier than that late unpleasantness, the Yemen War, and one project we worked on was the Korean War. You probably didn't know the Korean War was in, well, it wasn't in South Carolina. We got invited with the State Historic Preservation Office to advocate with the Department of the Army. They were getting ready to destroy an Incheon anti-tank earthworks training base that was within the boundaries of Fort Jackson. And there were originally 6 of them around the country, and this is the last one. And so the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, was going to destroy it to build a maintenance shed. And so when SHPO, the acronym for State Historic Preservation Office, called, we were only too happy to be involved because we wanted it preserved, but I also wanted to be able to tell people like you, I'm preserving the Korean War too. So we were excited to be part of that. And off topic, I'm going to brag for a second just because I hadn't even taken time to celebrate this victory, but we had been working on a site in Jasper County to get a conservation easement on it for 20 years with no success. Now that precedes my time with the trust, but I personally have been working on it for 4 years. And just a week ago, at the Richland Town Council meeting, we signed a conservation easement to protect the Honey Hill battlefield from Silver. So I sent some emails out to all my Civil War friends because they're worried that with the Liberty Trail I'm ignoring the unpleasantness, but no, we're still working on every front. So we're in a partnership with the well, I put this slide on here. It has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about tonight, but I just love this painting. It's the painting of the Battle of Fort Sullivan. It's painted by John Blake White, a Charleston attorney in the early 1800s, and this painting hangs in the United States Capitol. I'd like to tell you that we were going to acquire Fort Moultrie because they don't, in my opinion, they don't do as much as they should to honor the Battle of Fort Sullivan, but no, they won't give it up. But I just love that painting, so that's just there. And so the Liberty Trail. telling the unknown story of South Carolina in the American Revolution. So I'll tell you how this rolled out. Is the Congress has always had a federal grant program for the acquisition of Civil War battlefields. They've never had one for the Revolutionary War, oddly enough. And so a couple of years ago, they changed the legislation and made Revolutionary War battlefields eligible as well. They didn't add any more money, but they broadened who qualified. And so nobody was preserving Revolutionary War land on a national scale. And so the National Park Service approached the Civil War Trust and said, we'd like you all to consider getting involved in Revolutionary War preservation. Now that's no small ask, because these people, the entire staff, 43 people, they're so immersed in the Civil War. If you went to them and said, where was Jeb Stuart on his horse at the day 3 of Gettysburg, they would take you to the tree. I mean, they know it like the back of their hand. But coming into this, other than George Washington and John Paul Jones, and looked up the dates, they didn't know anything about the American Revolution. So they set off studying it for a year. And they decided to hold a meeting in Charleston. Charles Baxley was there, a number of people were there, and they were announcing that they were going to get into Revolutionary War preservation, and they were unveiling these maps of major battles in the Southern campaigns. And as one map went up after another, knowledgeable people in the room kept saying, well, that one's wrong. And that map's not right, and that's all screwed up. And I mean, they were horrible. The Battle of Stone Oak Ferry, which is in the town limits of Hollywood, South Carolina on the coast, they had at Rantol's, like 3 miles away. They weren't even touching the battlefield. And so they had some, no offense, John, and you other people that have ventured down from the north, they had northern contractors do the Southern campaign's maps. And that just didn't work. They didn't know it, they'd never walked it, they'd never seen it. They didn't come touch the sleeve of Pope Charles Baxley to get the information. Oh, I've been on my knees, begging Charles for help on things. And so it was a mess. And so I got in a conversation with Jim Lighthizer, who's the president of the Civil War Trust. That was still their name. They since have changed their name to the American Battlefield Trust. They got tired, and I got really tired of walking into meetings trying to explain away what's the Civil War Trust doing in a Revolutionary War project. So they've rebranded. No small thing on their side. But he said, Doug, we want to preserve the Revolutionary War in South Carolina. Now this is a bunch of Maryland boys. They said, we've studied this for about a year, and we've come to the conclusion that were it not for South Carolina, the Patriots arguably don't win the Revolutionary War. I said, well, Jim, if you just called me a year ago, I'd saved you all that study. I could have told you this. But actually, I'm glad y'all persevered on your own. And they came independently to that conclusion. So they said, we'd like to partner with y'all and do a project in South Carolina, a massive project. Well, it's grown since the days we first talked about it, and I'm here to tell you this is the most ambitious preservation project in the United States today. And you're going to see how and why. And so he said, the first thing y'all need to do is tell us what's out there that we should save. So I consulted with Charles, and JD gave us information, and David Ruhr, and a lot of people. And, because there were a lot of battles in South Carolina, and I said, guys, we got to pare this list down. We can't save everything. And so we had our own bloodbath to reduce the list, and we came up with 69 sites. Some of them are not battlefields, like Mepkin Abbey. That was John Lawrence' home, Mepkin Plantation. But with the permission of the monks, we're going to be able to interpret Mepkin Plantation on their grounds. And they're going to work with us. And they've even agreed to put Revolutionary War literature in their gift shop. So while you visit the monastery and get yourself centered, you can find out stuff about Lawrence. Big in Church is another example. It's already owned, well, we don't know which church owns it. We got to wait for the Episcopalians and Anglicans to finish fighting, but one of the two owns it. And so when that's settled, we want to put some interpretation there. But most of these sites are battlefields. Actual, honest-to-God battles. And you're going to see a map of it. A lot of you have touched this and have already heard about it. And so, for those of you that have, just pretend like it's brand new and fresh. And for those of you that haven't, I think you're going to be excited by what you're going to see. A lot of people in this room have helped us. One of the first things we did was all those maps that they had wrong from the National Park Service. We put together a volunteer team led by Charles, working alongside with me to redo all these maps. And that team walked all these battlefields, looked at the topography, did the LiDAR so we could see. LiDAR is like a topo map on espresso. And we've developed phased battle maps for those top 20 battles. Every major movement within the battle. We called John Lawrence and we said, John, we'd like to hook something up to your head and you just transfer everything you know to us. And John said we could not hook up his head, but he'd be glad to tell us all about it, which we did. Ed Forte and Leon over here at the table, they were part of that team. Charles has been involved. In the back of the room, Keith Gordine. We're working Keith so hard right now, he just told me that he's expecting his royalty check any moment. But Keith's working with us in Berkeley County and at the Battle of Utah Springs. So what we did was we said back to Jim Lighthizer, there's 69 places we either need to interpret or acquire. Buy them. And he said, great. Now, they're doing some things they've never done in their 30-year history. They've saved 50,000 acres of Civil War battlefields in 24 states. But every single one of them is a high priority battlefield that is eligible for this federal grant system that I was talking about. On the Revolutionary War, of the 69 sites, at least 2/3 of them won't qualify for a federal 50% matching grant, meaning we've got to raise the money in total to buy it. That's a big leap and a real different thing for them. The other thing that's different, they've acquired battlefield land and then they pass it off to somebody, a state, a county, a historical society, a friends group, whatever. They don't stay involved in it. They don't keep an inventory of property. And they never get involved in interpretation. But in the Liberty Trail, as we've now come to call this, we are going to interpret the heck out of this thing. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of the things we're playing around with right now. So it's brand new for them. We finally decided that we were going to organize this into 4 driving trails around the state. They're not organized by campaign or by dates. They're just simply organized geographically and so that people can get to it. And I'll show you how we intend to accomplish that. So that's the benefits of this. It provides for the acquisition, the interpretation, and the promotion. We're talking with a consulting company about rolling out a national campaign on the South Carolina Liberty Trail. A national campaign. Y'all have to have a bigger community college once this gets going. I went to Sweatman's Barbecue, if you've ever been there, between Utahville and Holly Hill. And if you haven't been there, you need to drop everything and go soon. Go tomorrow, well not tomorrow, go next weekend. But I was chatting with the owners, and he said, you've been in here a bunch recently, and my wife wondered why I only had meetings in Utahville on Fridays. Well, that's because Sweatman's only open Friday and Saturday. But I said, you guys need to settle up. Y'all need to open more days. I'm getting ready to bring you a lot of business. And it was like I said in a conversation with a town councilman in Utahville. He said, this thing y'all want to do with the Battle of Utah Springs, why is that a big deal to us? And I said, well, I'll tell you why. And I had two people from the American Battlefield Trust with me. My point person, my normal point of contact, we talk literally every day, Catherine Noyes. She's a South Carolina native. And then their digital guy, really sharp, smart fella, Larry, who, though, bless his heart, is from up north. And so I said to this councilman in Utahville, I said, well, look, the National Park Service just finished doing an economic impact report on Kings Mountain Cowpens in 96. It probably wouldn't surprise you to learn that 96 had the lowest visitation. He said, no, I figure that. I said, all right, 96 is in Greenwood. Nobody goes to Greenwood by accident. I mean, you've got to really mean to go to Greenwood. So it's not like you cruise about the interstate and you say, honey, let's turn it into 96. But yet, 180,000 people a year go there at 96. So I said to this town councilman, what if 180,000 people came to Utahville and bought gas, soda, and nabs? He said, wow, that'd be big. And then Larry, again, bless his heart, from up north, he looked at me and he said, what's a nab? It's hard to communicate sometimes with these people. So we're coordinating with the state, we're coordinating with Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, we're coordinating with the Department of Natural Resources, we're into county council meetings, town council meetings, working closely with the State Senate Finance Committee. This is a full court press that we're in the middle of. And so this is the map of the Liberty Trail. I leave here and go to showing some major donors to this project around the state tomorrow, Sunday, and Monday. And goodness knows, as I'm rushing out of the house, barely packed for the weekend, your copies of this map are on my desk. Y'all are welcome to come by. But seriously, if you'll email me, you can find me through our website. I'd be delighted to send you a digital copy of this. But you can see, there's a coastal trail. There's a trail over here for places you don't go by accident. You got an up top trail, Kings Mountain Cowpens, ends over here in Oconee County, ring fight. Really cool Andrew Pickens story. And where we initially focused our efforts is Trail 1, Monk's Corner to Lancaster County. That follows the general footprint of the old wagon road, that if you continued up this trail, you'd end up in Salisbury, and if you blinked for 2 weeks, you'd end up in Philadelphia. So it's a major travel corridor during the colonial period. But we're buying property off of Trail 1 already. We have contracts at the Battle of Port Royal Island. We're negotiating the contract in the area of the ring fight. We're negotiating several battlefields over here and a couple over here. But we've hit Trail 1 really hard. And but that's what it looks like. And as you see, there are 4 drivable trails to link to all these battles. And so this is just a close-up of Trail 1. Mepkin, Avenue of the Cedars, Wadbu Bridge, Biggin Church, Battle of Monk's Corner, Colleton Castle, Fort Fairlawn, Drew Ruddy in the back of the room. He's with the Berkeley Museum. They'll be taking the lead on managing the Fort Fairlawn site, which we're very appreciative of, and comes on down the list. Utah Springs, we end up at Fort Watson, Highos of Santee, Camden, Hopkirk's Hill, historic Camden, Hopkirk's Hill, Battle of Camden, Rugeley's Mill. We are negotiating a 50-acre tract there right now, Hanging Rock, and then we end up at the massacre at Waxhaws on Trail 1. And so, I already mentioned Mepkin Abbey. Somebody actually lectured me the other day in a presentation saying, Henry Lawrence was one of the greatest slave traders in his era. How can you interpret his plantation? Why would you honor him? I said, well, President of the Continental Congress, he did immense things in his career, only American imprisoned in the Tower of London. You've heard Charles tell that whole story. And if you ignore Henry Lawrence, you miss John. John, a leading abolitionist from South Carolina in the colonial period. That's a huge story. It's even politically correct if you're so inclined. But the Lawrence family is a monster-sized story. And the Lawrence family cemetery is there at Mepkin Abbey. John was originally buried near the Tar Bluff battlefield, but then they later recovered his remains and brought it back to the family cemetery. This is a drone photo. Mepkin is important too because Francis Marion was there a couple times on that bluff overlooking the Cooper River, particularly during the retreat at Utah Springs, trying to keep British ships from moving up the Cooper to go bail out Stewart and his guys. And, what a magnificent sight. Why would you not preserve this area? This is the ruins of Biggin Church. It's part of the Battle of Monk's Corner. It's in the footprint of that battle. Later it's occupied and fortified by the British. It's an ammo depot, and they later burn it as they're marching out to another battle. This again is an aerial, a drone photo of, here's Biggin Church right here, and what you don't really see because of the trees is the Tail Race Canal. And then the site, there's no bridge there left anymore, but we do know the footprint of Biggin Bridge that figured into this. So we intend to interpret all of that. Well, now I just hit the wrong button. There we go. This is Fort Fairlawn in Monk's Corner. It's an extant British redoubt in magnificent condition. A parade of all the notable British units have come through here. Cornwallis was here, Tarleton was here. It was attacked by a multitude of patriots, figured in a really important battle in November 1781. We worked with the Lord Berkeley Conservation Trust and raised $2 million and bought 80 acres of land, which includes this redoubt. This is a local artist watercolor of what we believe the redoubt would have looked like at the time that it was used. If you have not been to Fort Fairlawn, you need to call or email me and harass me until I tell you the date that someone will take you there. It'll eventually be open to the public, but we're not ready yet. We have paid a firm to create a master plan for the site, and now we're raising money to enact the master plan and walking trails and kiosk and everything. But we are taking people out here already by appointment, and I commend it to you highly if you want to see a very rare thing. There aren't two others around that I know that are like this. And so this is something, if you're interested enough to come here, you need to go there. This is what the master plan looks like. I'm sure from your seat you can see it all in detail, but no, I know you can't. But I'm just showing that, okay, we do have a master plan. We're not kidding. We worked with Davison Floyd engineers to produce that. And the Berkeley Museum is over here. This is the old Santee Canal Park. Even though the fort was over here, we bought all of this land simply so we could connect it to the park. And you'll eventually access Fort Fairlawn through the park gate. and then hopefully get your ticket to go see it at the Berkeley Museum. But all those details have still got to be worked out. So, Battle of Utah Springs. This is the biggest battle that no one's ever heard of. You might have heard this before, but if I'm repetitive, it doesn't matter. It warrants saying again. The Congress passed a bill when they were establishing national military parks. Utah Springs was supposed to be a national military park. Just like Cowpens, just like Kings Mountain, there was supposed to be one in Utah. Well, at the time, South Carolina, this is in the 30s, we're in the middle of the lake project, Lake Marion, Lake Moultrie, for hydroelectric power. And so the state said to the federal government, if you don't mind, would y'all stand down on this project until we get the lakes finished, and then we'll see what kind of land we have around it, and then we're good to go. And so everybody said, okay, we'll do that. Well, then by the time the lake's open, in a hop and a skip, we're at Pearl Harbor. And no one ever came back. This is a law still standing on the books that no one's ever going to touch. So with Keith's help, Charles, a number of others, Leon, Ed, a number of people were working to establish a friends group there. We're already buying land at Utah Springs. We intend to get this place on the map. It's too important of a battle to not be prominently featured. And so this is a map from the American Battlefield Trust of Utah Springs. They like to do their battles all on one map. If Charles has taught me nothing, he taught me the value of phasing these maps. For a battle that happened a half a day and covered 4.5 square miles of land, you just can't do it on one map. And Utah Springs is a great example of that. How many of you have been to the Battle of Utah Springs? Some, maybe half the room. There's several really cool things about it. One is, this is the very road that Greene marched down. And it's still a dirt road. And at the time of the battle, there's farm fields on both sides. Today, there's farm fields on both sides. You can get lost in 1781 on this road. Now, how many times do you have that opportunity? Well, you do at Fort Fairlawn, because you won't hear or see the 21st century when you're at that fort. But here's Greene marching down to the battle. This is the drone footage of where the guys were out foraging for sweet potatoes. And they hear when Greene's men, his point men, Light Horse Harry and people, collide with Coffin and his dragoons and the light infantry that Stuart had sent out. Some deserters go in Stuart's camp and said, Greene's just down the road. And Stuart, he thinks that's impossible. How could Greene be that close? He would surely know it. So he sends out dragoons and infantry, and sure enough, Greene's marching down the road. And so Coffin wheels around, mounted, goes back to warn Stuart. The PLI kind of dots their way back. But you have all these poor souls, 300 men out there rooting for sweet potatoes to feed the army. And so they hear the gunfire at the start of the battle at 8 a.m. And what do? They instinctively move to the sound of the gunfire. A few made it back to the British camp. Most were either killed or captured right there. So Greene had the fortune that, he took at least 300 men out of action right at the first swoop. This is a marina that's there. This is the nucleus of the Corps. Part of this property was the British camp that was there. What we're doing, there's so much property here, we can't buy all of the battlefield of Utah Springs. Number one, it's 4.5 square miles. Number two, there's catfish fishermen in little mobile homes all over the place on part of it. It would take us, so there's like 100 property owners in ramshackle trailers that we'd have to buy out. We just can't do that. If any of you live in Utahville, there are also lovely places in Utahville. But what we're doing is we're buying property at the different major phases of the battle, the start of the battle, where there was another re-engagement before they get to the major part of the battle, the point where where green comes out of a column and goes into lines. We bought property there. And certainly at the end of the battle, where the British camp was and Stuart's headquarters was, which is down in here. There's about a 16-acre tract owned by Santee Cooper. And if you've been there, about half of it is where the monuments are, and the other half, Department of Natural Resources uses it. And we have leased all that land from Santee Cooper for $1 a year for 99 years. And in exchange, we'll manage it. A great deal for us. And the DNR agents weren't that happy that they're going to be moving out, but Santee Cooper's going to give them another spot on the lake to go to. We have our own, this is an aside, silly story, but we have our own landscape crew that helps manage these sites that we buy. And so my landscaper is a really nice guy out of Somerville for that part of the state. And so he's over at Utah Springs mowing out the area. And the DNR agent that happened to be there that Saturday morning, the word had not gotten to him that this deal has gone down, he's going to have to leave. So he goes up to my guy and he says, "What are you doing here?" He looks, points to his right and over, he says, "I'm cutting grass." And he said, "Well, yeah, why? Why are you doing it? This is DNR property." He said, "No, I work for the South Carolina Battleground Trust." Well, I've never heard of them. And Gary said, "Well, you probably have heard of Doug Bostick." And he said, "I've never heard of Doug Bostick." And Gary said, "Well, I'm shocked because that guy's famous." Which, of course, is a big lie. And that boy started backpedaling immediately. He shut up. He said, because Gary said, "I'll call him right now on the phone if you want me to." He said, No. That's all right. You go on about your business." So I tried to tell my wife that night I was famous. It didn't work then either. But this battle's so big. Continental Congress awards one of only 7 gold medals for this battle to Nathaniel Greene. And those are copies of the medal that he was awarded. And so this figures prominently in the battle. You recognize that? It's Camden Yards. It's the Orioles. Hardly anybody went to their games this year, by the way, so nobody, they were so bad. But John Edgar Howard is one of the commanders on the Maryland Continentals in this battle. He's so enamored by his experience there at Utah Springs. When he gets back to Maryland, later becomes governor, he names his own home, Belvedere, after one of the Singler family properties that was nearby. Streets in historic Baltimore are named for either things or fellow Patriot officers in this battle. In downtown Baltimore, if you drive around historic Baltimore, there's Green Street, Marion Street, Lee Street, on and on and on. And so the way, how do you get to Camden Yards? You go down Utah Street. Now, there's a vendor there. This is the entrance to the stadium, and where all the vendors are set up. There's a guy that sells t-shirts there that's emblazoned "Victory at Utah." He's got the meaning all wrong. I think it means a whole different thing. So we had somebody go and ship us some of them. We got to start buying them more regular. But that's how much the Lord. South Carolina has a state song, by the way. I'm sure y'all could all sing it. But sing it. Sing it? Sing it. Well, I would, but then y'all wouldn't come back next year. But the only battle of any war in our state song is Utah Springs. That's how big it was in its day. It's lost that luster. We intend to get it back. And so this is the footprint of the battle. Battlefield boundary is anything related to the battle. This is where Greene was camped the night before the battle at Burdell's. maybe Burdell's Tavern, maybe just Burdell's. We're still playing with that. Here's the historic road, green marshes down that day. And the yellow section is shots fired. And so we've worked out a conservation easement here. We bought 15 acres here. We have bought property here. We're leasing a big property here. We bought a property over here. And we have contracts with property in here. And we're not done. We're still more that we want to buy. But that's what we're doing at Utah Springs. Now that I've got the American Battlefield Trust trained up on what NABs are, this is going to be a big NAB event as this unfolds. So, Battle of Camden. This is the American Battlefield Trust map for the battle. See how I tell you they squeeze everything into one map? You'll be happy to know we have this in phase maps too. We just finished buying this 298 acres. This is the place where DeKalb tries to rally the American troops, and unfortunately he's mortally wounded. And so we're shortly going to be gifting this property to the Historic Camden Foundation. Now, some of these battlefields our organization will own, but only if there's not a good local owner. We're going to be buying property. We're negotiating right now at Musgrove's Mill. We hope the state's going to take that. Same at Blackstock's. Hanging Rock will probably hold on to it. The other thing I've done is I've started instituting a policy, borrowing an old military term, that for all of our sites that we say grace over, whether by easement or we acquire it, I establish a provost marshal for that site, for every site. And that's a person that is local, keeps eyes on it. You know, I don't get to Hanging Rock every day, but Kip Carter does. And so if you want to meet the provost marshal for Kip Carter, he'll sign autographs afterwards for you. Keith Gerdine, he's working with us on so many battlefields, we don't even know where to put his name. But the other thing Keith does, incidentally, is manicure, watch over, and baby the grave of Francis Marion. So you can thank him for that. But anyway, we're going to gift this. We've raised the money for it. We bought it, the American Battlefield Trust. We're going to give it to the Camden Foundation for free for them to manage. This is a drone view of the Battle of Camden site. They're also in the midst of an amazing conversion to longleaf pine. And if you haven't been to Camden recently, then you just haven't been to Camden. You need to go while it's cleared out. It's a whole different looking place, and you get a much better appreciation for the battle. Battle of Hanging Rock, we're prominently involved in that. This again is the one version map of the battle. It's really got 5 distinct phases to it. This is the first property we bought, 122 acres. This is a little 1 acre piece here and a 15 acre piece here. But since all that's gone down, this is an aerial view of the area. Since that's gone down, this is what we've done. We already own this. We own this over here. We're closing on a 2.3 acre piece here next week. We have a contract on 30.84 acres. We have a right of first refusal for a 3 acre site here. This property is now being appraised, and we've negotiated the purchase of that. We don't have a closing date yet. We're just early in all that. And this is the last piece that we would hope to buy that we've got to get engaged with the owner who lives in Virginia. If we have this nailed down, we pretty much have the entire Battle of Hanging Rock. And then we'll start interpreting it. Here's Waxhaws. This is how the battle unfolded. This is the famous massacre by Tarleton. This is a drone view of the site. Lancaster County owns a little 2 acre thing here. We've bought, let me back up, all this here in light blue, we've already bought 58 acres. And we're negotiating on the other side of the road. Fortunately, one property owner, and I think we'll eventually get that. If we do, we have the entire Battle of Waxhaw is now forever preserved. Now, I was thinking in Lancaster County, down on this end, there's probably not a whole lot of competition for land. This property was owned by a local Methodist church, and when I got involved in it, they had been hearing from a company that wanted to put a solar farm there. Now, I don't know how real that was or wasn't, but when I met with the church council, we're limited to offering appraised value. We can't get in bidding wars with people. And I said to the church council, if you'll pardon the analogy, the only bullet I've got in my gun is to ask you to do the right thing. And it happened to be on Veterans Day. And I said, these are America's first veterans. It's where they were martyred. That is sacred ground. If anybody can relate to that, a church can. And all I can ask you to do is, we've had it appraised in cooperation with you. That's what they're telling it's worth on the fair market, and we'll pay you every penny of it. So then it was one of those dramatic things where I leave and they'll say they'll call me the next morning. I didn't get to stay for the secret super Methodist session. And they called the next day and said they were thrilled to sell it to us. We're working earnestly on that. It's just another view of the same thing. This is the property we already own. This is the property that we're working to acquire. And a close-up of what's owned by the county. Blackstocks is one of the greatest, most interesting battles, pretty much unknown to people. There are probably people in this room that know about it, but you get in the general public, people don't know Blackstocks. Fortunately, John Allison knows it like the back of his hand. Again, everything in the entire battle is squeezed on one map here, but we have phase mapped this as well, and that's a drone view. I mean, look how pristine this is. There's no 21st century anywhere near this site. You don't get a cleaner site than this. And here's the battlefield up in here. We hired this drone photographer to go around the state with us, filming a lot of this stuff. And so I'm ashamed to tell you, but I probably should admit to you that while the drone operator was working, filming all this, he caught on video David Brewer trying to make time with his wife. And so we have documented this carefully. Next time you see David Brewer, just say shame on you, and don't even tell him why. But you can see David's trying to impress the wife while this poor guy's slaving away for us. So these are some of the interpretive things. We're working with Camden. They're getting ready to build a new Revolutionary War Visitor Center. A cooperative project between the county, historic Camden, and the Kershaw County, the town of Camden, and historic Camden Foundation. We're working with them on the interpretation inside. So we've got a high-tech company in Philadelphia that's loaded with young people that stay up all night and live on Red Bull that create these things. And this is one of the kinds of interpretive panels that they're recommending us to do. We also, one of the places we own in Utah Springs is the old Chef's Choice restaurant, which is a good-sized building and in pretty good shape. And we're probably, we haven't pulled the trigger on it, but we're probably going to create another visitor center there. Might be open weekends only, but we want to do something indoors. And then we want to do something indoors somewhere up in the Lancaster area. But that's not decided yet. Here's a interactive topographical battle map that they have done for other museums. We're very interested in this. We're developing an app, a smartphone and tablet app for the entire Liberty Trail. It'll give you driving directions. You can link into battle maps. You can link into biographies of important people that were in the battle. It'll even end up giving you how to get to Sweatman's Barbecue and where do you stay. Now, one thing it will not do, and I've only learned this, Keith lives in this area, so he knows all this stuff. So does Drew. But I didn't really know what noodling was until I started working in Utahville. And I don't know if y'all know what that is, but that's these boys that go catfish fishing, and they take their arm and reach under the bank and try to shove their arm up in the mouth of the catfish. And when the catfish clamps down on them, then they pull him out. And I started seeing these boys at the convenience store with these scrapes on their arms. And someone said, "Oh yeah, those are noodlers." But once it was explained to me, I don't talk to those fellas. That's crazy. But this app is being engineered as we speak, and that's what's going to tie this whole thing together. So it's not, we don't want you to have to worry about where do you go hunt down the little booklet or the map in a store somewhere. This is going to be an app free to the public that's going to carry all this information. And we're going to do phased animated maps on the key battles in the Liberty Trail. Now I don't have a picture of it, but the other thing they showed us, which I went nuts over, even for a little organization like mine, we've experimented with augmented reality in the last couple of years. And they showed me a product where they took a retro thing and made it a brand new thing. The retro, remember the old viewfinders? We had them on the Battery in Charleston, where you put a quarter in it and you could look through the binoculars and see Fort Sumter. They've developed a viewfinder, something like this size. They developed a viewfinder, when you look through it, you'll see the British camp at Utah Springs. So you don't have to imagine it, you're going to see it. Now, why is that so big? I have 3 children, ages 34 to 25. I have bored them to the point of them calling the Department of Social Services by stopping at every darn roadside sign I pass to read it. But I'm an old guy. If I see a hump of dirt and a static sign of 130 words, I can be good. They would die 1,000 deaths. So we developed our first augmented reality model. I called my youngest into my office, which is in my house, and I said, "Taylor, I want you to see what we're doing." And he looked at it, and he put his arm around me. I was sitting in my chair. He's looking on my computer. He said, "Dad, thank God you're finally doing something that's cool." But we got to meet the younger generation where they are. We can't wait for them to turn old and crusty and get where we are. We got to give them whiz bangs. That's the Xbox generation. Now, I'm not saying we're going to turn all these battlefields into Disneyland, but there's got to be ways they can get satisfied by what they expect to see. And these viewfinders are going to be that. We're toying with putting them at Fort Fair. We haven't made the whole final list, but we've talked about Fort Fairlawn, Utah Springs, Camden, at Biggin Church, because we'd be able to model the church the way it looked at the time of the battle. Hanging Rock, we're very interested in, Waxhaws, and maybe others. So the interpretation of this thing will eventually be massive. And that's really the exciting part. But none of that matters if we don't save the dirt. This is sacred ground. We need your help. I need y'all to immediately, this football season, drop back and start drinking Paps and take the extra money y'all use to buy craft beer and send that to us for these battlefield acquisitions. But I don't care if you can afford $5 or $5,000, you need to be in this thing. We need your help to do this. This stuff isn't free. I was part of a group that held a dinner event at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. And so the American Battlefield Trust invited a whole group of hedge fund guys that had been donors to them before, but on the Civil War side. And we held this dinner with all these people. And we had a speaker that was there who's a South Carolinian, spent 34 years in the CIA. He was one of the advanced guys in Afghanistan. And he told us in his presentation, when he and his immediate superior talked about how to deal with Afghanistan, they spent many nights talking about Sumter, Marion, Pickens, Morgan. They used the Southern Campaign and applied those principles to what they were doing. I thought that was really cool. One of the first guys in that dinner, he's a New Yorker. He's never even been to South Carolina. Doesn't have family here, doesn't know anything about it. He donated $250,000. Now, I'd like to tell you, we have that kind of thing every day. We don't. But we need this momentum not to fade. And so if you care about the Revolutionary War, if you care about your ancestors, if you care about this thing, then we need you involved. Your time, your talent, and your treasure. We need people to step up and organize fringe groups at all these battlefields. I need somebody to come to me and say, I want to be the person at XYZ battle. I will watch over it, I'll baby it, I'll report to you regularly, and we'll help you find people to support this effort. I just need people to say, hey, the landscape crew hadn't shown up lately and the grass is high. Because I don't get to these sites every day. So now's the time. Development or solar farms or wind farms or whatever, they're going to take over the state. When we bought our first property in Hanging Rock, I don't normally use realtors, I usually do it myself, but if there is a realtor representing an owner already, I use a realtor. So at the first property at Hanging Rock, I used a realtor. And I said, Bart, just kind of soft pedal this thing. We don't really want people to know yet what we're doing or why we're doing it or why we're buying this property. Just sort of go easy. And so Bart, called up the other realtor. I got a client, blah, blah, blah. They were offering X dollars. We said, we'll pay what you want. Deal's done. Signed a contract. Well, then the word got out that the gold mine was buying up property in Heath Springs. And I heard that and I said, oh, good God. So we immediately issued a press release because now we want people to know that we're not the gold mine, because that would have jacked prices up into the stratosphere. The other, it's kind of a sad story, but and Bart did it entirely accidental, but you appreciate this because, again, the other realtor doesn't know who we are or what we do. And so she's disclosing to Bart that a woman had been murdered in this house. And that's why the house hadn't really moved. She was apparently a very fine woman, and it was a horrific thing. And she just wanted Bart to know about it because a lot of people were uneasy about buying that property. And before Bart could catch himself, he blurts out, well, that's no big deal. My client only buys property where people were killed. No disrespect intended to the poor woman who was actually murdered, but true enough, that is what we buy. I do this in at the end just because I like it, I love it. It ties into our earlier presentation about maritime affairs. Although sitting next to a Marine, he wants to have a long chat with you later about whether the war's won on the water or the ground. But if you can't read it from your seat, a rich and powerful nation with numerous fleets and experienced admirals sailing triumphant over the ocean with large armies and able generals in many parts of the globe. This great nation we dare to oppose. Without money, without arms, without ammunition. No generals, no armies, no admirals, and no fleets. This was our situation when the contest began. Quote from William Moultrie. That's the kind of people our ancestors were. They would face those odds to bring liberty to this country. The least we could do is honor them by saving these great sacred places where they fought for us and generations to come. I always end with this picture just because I love it. And I was able to get a high resolution digital copy from the United States Capitol. If any of y'all would like it,